This video walks through the Creating Modules learning exercise, which demonstrates how to create your own module from scratch, which you can then reuse and share in workbooks going forward. Now to start creating your own module, go to the Modano tab, the New menu, and click on Empty Module. There are a number of different ways you can create modules, including a new module wizard, but we're going to do the empty module approach because it's most foundational in how it builds it up so you can understand how it all works. Now, once the new module has been created, the empty module, you can see that there are two asterisks on the Modano tab indicating that it is a module file that's open as opposed to a modular workbook, as opposed to a freeform workbook. And you can see that the only sheet it has in there is the checks because according to our default options, the checks modules get put in for us. And other than that, it's just an empty shell we can start building on. Now in this exercise, we're going to build a basic revenue module with separate assumptions and outputs, very similar to the modules we've been using in the automation fundamentals and the customizing modules exercises that preceded this. It's not a complicated module, but the concepts are the same as what would be used in an incredibly complex module, like a regulated assets module, for example. So we're going to go through the core concepts. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is specify the properties of this module because the file is going to be reused going forward. So we're going to specify the properties really clearly. And to do that, go to the Build tab, Project Manager, and then select the module in the Project Explorer on the left, and then click on the Properties tab, and then click Edit. And in this case, we're going to call the module Revenue Amounts. Its generic name is revenue because that's what people refer to it as. It's a revenue module. Its prefix is rev. And we're going to put an order index of 500. Now that determines what order this module goes in relative to other modules like operating expenditure and prices and volumes and income statements, etc. When you build your own libraries, the order index becomes really important so that when you insert modules, they get inserted in the right place in your workbook. But to start with, just bear that in mind. For description, we are going to enter calculates revenue for a number of revenue categories over a number of time series periods. And for functionalities, we're going to enter collects revenue assumptions for each category as amounts for each time series period. Now, for more advanced properties, we're going to enter the genre. And now the genre, category, variant, sales tax, and region properties are really important if you're going to start uploading your modules to the Modano website into your libraries for reuse, because that's how people will search for them. So in this case, the genre is revenue, the category is amounts, and the variant, you can have any variant you like, but in this case, we're going to call it separate assumptions and outputs. And we're doing that because it's more than likely we might create a version of this module called revenue amounts single component, because a lot of people don't like separating assumptions and outputs, so it's really up to you. So we're making it really clear what that is. So sales taxes, none, not relevant to this. Region, I'm going to put any on this one. And for version to kick it off, we're going to put 10.0.10. Now, just one other thing worth noting is the prefix. Now, the prefix of a module is what's used if you're using range names in your module, because obviously if you have 5 revenue modules, the prefix will be rev, rev2, rev3, rev4, rev5. And if you have a name in there, such as tax rate, it will be rev tax rate, rev2 tax rate, etc. So the prefix is important for sheet naming and range naming purposes. So click OK and just verify that those properties have come through, and then close, and you'll see the module name has now come through into the model name cell as well. Now, the next thing we're going to do with this module is we're going to allocate it to a module area. Now, if you go to the project manager, you remember in the workbooks we looked at in the first couple of exercises that module areas are used to segregate things like time series modules, checks modules. Now, when you create a new module by default, it goes into a default module area called modules, which doesn't really mean very much. Revenue is typically an operational or revenue and expenses module. So what we're going to do is we're going to allocate this to a revenue and expenses module out of an existing library on the Modano website, a financial modeling library, so that when this module gets put into another workbook, it goes in the same module area as other revenue and expenses modules, and therefore groups them according to type, which is really what we want to do. Now, to access that module area, click the Add button in the Module Areas group and click Download. And you'll see this will load a list of the available module areas in module libraries on the Modano website, and we're going to grab the financial modeling module area. So I'm going to download that, and that's going to give us access to a bunch of financial modeling module areas. Now, the benefit of using these module areas is that other people in your organization that use these same module areas will actually create modules that will fall into the same module area as your module. So we're going to add that, and then we're just going to drag our module into that module area and delete the generic one. Now, module areas, again, aren't hugely important to get right if you're just building a workbook for a specific transaction or for a specific client or for your business. But if you're building modules you're going to reuse, you really do want to classify them into a finite set of module areas by type so people can look at the structure of your workbook and it makes sense to them in the project manager. Now, on a similar note, we want to put time series analysis into this workbook, but we don't want to build it from scratch. Now, we could build our own time series module. You can do whatever you want with time series modules. But the key is time series modules are effectively the foundation of your workbook. So you really don't want to create a new time series module for every model, because all the other modules that you build on top of those time series will be locked to the time series modules you build. So rather than create a new time series module, we're just going to insert a time series module from the Modano website. So I'm just going to go to the Modano tab, insert menu, and put time series module. And I'm going to select all libraries. I'm going to select the annual United States time series module. And by doing this, it means that any other modules that have been built, of which there are thousands on the Modano website, that are based on this time series module, I'll be able to insert into the same workbook as this module I'm building now. So I'm going to press insert, and that's literally just going to put in the time series module from the Modano website. So here we go, I've got 5 periods. And if we look now, we now have our time series lookups and our time series assumptions. And you'll see if we were going to go and insert sheets now, we'd be able to insert sheets and we'd be able to insert time series assumption sheets. Now in this module, we're going to have separate assumptions and outputs on separate assumptions and outputs components that are going to be located on a time series assumption sheet and a time series output sheet. So let's insert a time series assumption sheet to house the revenue assumptions. And you'll see that will come in with the 5 periods. And at this stage, we have nothing on this sheet. So as we discussed in automation fundamentals, module content within Excel exists within module components. So we can't just start typing on this sheet now because it currently doesn't contain any module component. So to add a component, go to the Build tab, insert and add below on the Components menu, and we're going to add it to the Revenue Amounts module and press OK, and it adds a component. Now, it's really important to understand that process. In normal Excel, you just insert a sheet, start typing. In modular spreadsheet development, you insert a sheet and you add components to the sheet and you type within components. Now, if I turn on cell block shading here, you can see that that component actually spans the range A9 down to N26, which is easy to see because of the grouping that's been put in by default. And that's really the area I've got to start building this module. So it's important to think, okay, that's my assumptions component. Now, before I start building the assumptions content, I'm also going to add an outputs sheet. So I'm going to put an output sheet in, a time series output sheet for the outputs component for revenue. And then I'm going to go and put another component in, again, in the revenue module, but this is going to be my outputs component. And now I've got my outputs component. And once that's in, I can come back and I can see I've now got, according to my table of contents, I've now got my assumptions and outputs for my revenue module. Now to verify that, I can go to my project manager, click on my revenue module, and I can look and see I've got those two components. And if I double click on the assumptions, it'll show me where that area is. So I've now got a revenue module with an assumptions component and an outputs component. Now in the customizing modules learning exercise, we showed how you could add another category block to an existing categories group, which we did to add a discounts assumptions category block. In this case, we don't have any existing categories. So we need to add our first categories group and categories block at the same time. Now to do that, we go to the Build tab, Category Blocks menu, Insert Category Block, and we put the name of the category block. So I'm going to put here Revenue, because that's what my category block is, and that's going to put in 3 categories with a total row, so I'll do OK. And that puts that in. Now, a quicker way to do that, if you wanted to create a category block called expenses, is you could just type in expenses, category 1, and it will create a block as well. So the benefit of using the insert categories block dialog is that you get to type in the name very specifically in control, and you have more control of what's going on, but you don't necessarily need to use that dialog box to put in a new categories block and create a new categories group. So once that's done, it's just exactly the same as what we did in the customizing modules learning exercise, where we use the formats and styles to create this content. So I'm going to apply an assumptions heading style to this cell. I'm then going to merge that across. And then I'm going to apply a assumptions number style to that cell, fill that right. I always put values in so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to apply some Excel formatting, put a top border on this. and I've effectively created my revenue assumptions. So all I've done there is applied formats to the category block. The really only complex bit about this was understanding the module components and putting in the category block itself into a new categories group. Now, to assist with navigating between the revenue assumptions and revenue outputs, click on cell A10 and let's put a hyperlink in by going to the Tools, Hyperlinks, and I'm going to put an intercomponent hyperlink in. And then when I click on that, that'll go to the outputs, and I can click on A10 in the outputs and press F4, and that will put one back to the assumptions. And it's as easy as that to create what are called intercomponent hyperlinks, which are really valuable when you have a large model with a lot of components on each sheet. Now for the revenue outputs, we already have a categories group with one category block, which contains the revenue assumptions. So to create another category block, all we need to do is write a formula equaling the first heading, and it will automatically create that. And then we can apply a heading 4, and I'm going to apply a heading 3. And then with the numbers, they'll automatically fill down because it's a category block. So I can select J12, apply style, fill that right with Control R, Control B, border, top border, and I have my outputs. So you can see in literally 3 or 4 minutes, you can build a module for reuse and sharing around your organization. Now in the standardization learning exercise, we talked about the importance of error checks. Ideally, every module that contains formulas is capable of containing errors, so it should contain an error check. In this case, it's a very basic module. We have data validation on our assumptions. So it's actually really hard for this module to actually contain an error, but we should still put an error check in for best practice purposes. So particularly if someone comes and adds to this going forward, the error check will be there for them already. So I'm going to put an error check heading in here, make that a heading 4, and then I'm going to put a basic check in that says if is error that, then 1, otherwise 0. So basically, if there's an error in there, I'm going to trigger my error check. And then I'm just going to apply a number style, decimal places of 0, fill that right, Control R, and then I'm going to add an error check to I17. And the error check is going to sum that range, which is what I want. The error check title is going to be cell B10, which is fine. That's my component title. And I'm going to add that. And now I have an error check. So if I go to my error checks, you can see the module has an error check in the error check summary. And if there does happen to be an error in this module, such as a div 0, it will come through in the model, error and revenue amounts. So now I have an error check in my module. Now this module is complete, but for probably the most complex thing about modular spreadsheet development, and that is module linking. At the moment, this module will forecast revenue categories, but if you put it into a modular workbook, it won't link into an income statement that you then put in, an income statement module. So what we need to do is specify which parts of this module will link out into the income statement module. Now, the best way to think about module links is that they exist almost independently of any particular module, but when you specify specific rows to link out of one module with a module link that's the same as a module link you specify as a link into another module, they will link together. So the best way to demonstrate this is to look at what an actual module link is. So to do that, go to the Modano tab and do Open from Web. And in the Open from Web dialog box, select Module Links Library. And you'll see there's a couple of links libraries in here in our generic financial modeling library, and they contain a whole lot of links that we've already created that you can use. And by using these links, any modules you create will link to the modules we've created at Modano. So you can create your own links libraries, or you can use ours. It really is up to you as to whether you want to quarantine your modules or not. So here, I'm going to open this module links library, the financial modeling one, and you'll see it gives me a list of links. Now in this case, one of these links, if I scroll down, will be called revenue. And this revenue link is what we've used in all of our revenue modules. Here it is. So this revenue is in all of our revenue modules, and it contains a special GUID. There it is with that 4320 A4, etc. And that link is what we've used on our income statement to say, this is the link that we want to link in data with, and this is what we need to add to our link out. So you'll see that link there with that, it finishes with EFE, one EFE. If I open my income statement module from web, and I open, say, I'll go modules, and I'm going to open, say, an income statement module. And I'll go, say, I've got an income statement module for chart of accounts 1. It doesn't really matter where I get this from. But this income statement chart of accounts 1 here. So if I open that income statement module, and I go to the income statement, and I open up the revenue, and I look inside of this and say, what links into this? It will actually contain revenue. And if I look at the properties of that, it's that C1 EFE there. Okay, so what we've done when we created that revenue module is we've gone in and we've said, we want these rows here to link in revenue. And we've gone link in and we've specified which blocks link in what. And we've said link in the first 2 blocks we find of precedent modules. So here in our module, we need to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to go to the build menu, module links, and I'm going to specify link out. And I'm actually going to say, get them from the income statement module that I've just opened. You could also get them from the library that you could download the library, but here we've got the income statement module open. So I'll grab that and I'm going to add that. In this case, we have 2 blocks. We have cell block in column B, we have cell block in J to N. Both of them we want to link out data. So we can press OK. Now from an Excel perspective, it looks like nothing has happened. But what's actually happened there is we've made those rows something which will be detected by all dependent modules that link in that particular revenue link. So the link itself forms the relationship between precedent and dependent modules and the rows within them. And that's the magic of module links. Now from an Excel perspective, you can actually use the locate module links tool. And it will actually show you where the links are in modules. In this case, the module only contains 1 block of links. It's a link out, revenue links out from the rows we just added to, which is the category block spanning 12 to 15. If we go back to our income statement module and we run that tool, you'll see the income statement module contains a large number of module links. So you look at the module links in, we have revenue, other revenue, operating expenditure, and you can work your way down the income statement finding them. If you look at the module links out, we've created other links, income statement, revenue, etc., which link out into things like dashboards. So understanding where the links are and being able to locate them is the absolute key to creating relationships between modules that make them work together and make them reusable. Now, before we test this module, it's important to actually run our review tools on it. So I'm just going to go to the build tab and I'm going to run the search and repair tool and just make sure there are no errors in there, which there are not. And then I'm going to run the module content report tool to check that the module's okay. And in this case, it's actually got unused rows. So what's happened here is when we created these module components, by default, it gave us, I think, 18 rows to start with. We've only used a few of them. So it's saying, what do you want these there for, which we don't. If we inserted these modules into another workbook, you'd have a whole lot of blank rows. So we can just click delete and delete the unused rows from the bottom of both the assumptions and the outputs component. Just refresh and make sure nothing is found. And now we know this module is in good shape. Now, before I save this module, I'm just going to put it in save view. If you're going to reuse modules, we often recommend that you set out their properties on the cover sheet and then you put version control and switch version control on them. Now to switch on version control, go to the Modano tab, workbook, and do version control. And what version control does is it enables you to switch on, in this case it's 10.0.1.0. I'm going to use version monitoring and I'm going to make an increment the build and require a comment. Now what that means is the versioning system we use is 10.0 is the application, 1.0 is the first cut of this module. So Modano X is 10.0. Now, version monitoring means that every time you save, it will prompt you for a comment if this is switched on, and it will automatically increment in the versioning system here one of the variables where you have build, where you have major, minor, build, and revision. Now we do build because that's sort of the major changes to the module, and these are minor changes like typos and formatting, etc. So by switching this on, if I now close this and I do save as, it says to me, do you want to actually save this? And I say, yes, I do. And in this case, I'm just going to do initial module creation. And then when I save this, I can save it down here. And again, you can use any structure you like to actually name your modules. I always put amounts. I put genre, category, periodicity, or time series. In this case, I did any. So I'm just going to do 10.0, 10.0.1.0. Save this module. Okay, and the final thing you should always do when you create a standalone module like this is test it by inserting it and check that it links to whatever modules you'd like it to link to. So I'm now going to close this module. I'm going to open a new workbook and I'm going to insert from file, and I'm going to insert my revenue amounts module, which I just built. This will, just like in the automation fundamentals, this will create a new modular workbook and it will insert that module in with the time series module that I specified, which is the US time series module. So there's my revenue module, and I'll put in some numbers. I always put numbers in when I'm building modules. You can always then reset them by going to the build, cell blocks, and reset assumptions. You can reset the entire module back if you like, but I put numbers in while I'm building just so I can see that the calculations are correct and they're flowing through the outputs. Now to check that this links, because I know the links are in there because I put revenue in there, I'm going to insert from web and specify the income statement module. And there it is. And if this module is built correctly, it will link. And there's my revenue linking through. And then I can verify this by going into the project manager, looking at the revenue module and seeing its module link into the income statement.